Before the revolution and the roar of industry, there was a dream, quiet, devout, and determined. It began in the year 1630, when a fleet of English ships crossed the Atlantic, carrying 1,000 souls seeking something more than land. They came in the name of faith, not fortune. Among them was John Winthrop, a man who looked out over the wild New England coast, and declared, "We shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us." That city was Boston. The settlers chose a small peninsula called Shawmut, a place of fresh water, surrounded by the sea and salt marshes. It was harsh, rocky, and cold, yet to them it was sacred ground. They built with what they had: timber, stone, and faith. The narrow streets followed no plan but necessity, winding between wooden cottages and steeples that pointed heavenward. From its first days, Boston was not just a settlement. It was a statement, a declaration that a new kind of world could rise from the wilderness. Life was not easy. Winters were long, food was scarce, and disease moved faster than hope. Yet the Puritans endured. They built Boston Common, the first public park in America, as a shared pasture and a promise of community. They founded Boston Latin School in 1635, the first public school in the New World, and 1 year later, Harvard College in nearby Cambridge. Knowledge and faith walked hand in hand. Education, they believed, was a form of worship, a way to understand God's creation and govern justly. In the meeting houses that doubled as churches and town halls, democracy quietly took root. Ordinary men, not kings or nobles, gathered to debate, vote, and decide. The Puritans did not know it yet, but they were laying the foundations of American self-government. Boston became a city of words as much as walls, where sermons shaped politics, and every decision was weighed against conscience. But their moral vision came with shadows. The same zeal that gave them unity also bred intolerance. Dissenters like Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson challenged the rigid order and were banished into the wilderness. The Puritans dreamed of freedom, but a freedom that belonged only to those who thought like them. It was the paradox that would echo through the centuries: Boston as the birthplace of liberty and the guardian of order. Still, the city grew. Ships filled the harbor, carrying timber, fish, and furs to England, and returning with books, cloth, and glass. The smell of salt and trade filled the air. Merchants began to prosper, and with wealth came ambition. Wooden houses gave way to brick mansions. Cobblestone streets replaced dirt paths. From its docks to its meeting houses, Boston pulsed with purpose. By the late 1600s, Boston was the largest and most important town in the English colonies, a place of industry, intellect, and influence. Yet beneath the progress, a darker current stirred. Fear of the unknown, of sin and witchcraft, began to haunt the Puritan soul. In nearby Salem, hysteria would soon claim innocent lives, a reminder that faith without tolerance can become tyranny. Boston, though spared the worst, felt the tremors of doubt, and still it endured. Through hardship and hypocrisy, through prayer and progress, the city that John Winthrop imagined began to take form, imperfect, human, alive. It was not yet the Boston of revolution or universities or skyscrapers, but the seed of all those things lay here in these cobblestone streets and candlelit homes. As the 17th century closed, Boston stood as a paradox made real, a city built on both devotion and defiance. A city that looked heavenward, yet was already shaping the earth below. And though the Puritans could not foresee it, their city upon a hill would one day set the standard for a nation still learning how to live by its own light. In this place of faith and frost, where sermons echoed across the bay and lanterns glowed in the night, a legend was born, the legend of a city that would teach America how to dream, how to build, and how to rise. By the dawn of the 18th century, Boston was no longer a fragile settlement clinging to survival. It was a city of merchants, shipbuilders, and ministers, pulsing with faith and ambition. The narrow streets bustled with the rhythm of trade. Barrels of molasses rolled down to the docks, sails fluttered in the harbor, and the smell of tar, salt, and promise filled the air. The Puritan dream had built a city of order. But now something new was rising, a spirit of independence. Boston's harbor became the heart of a booming Atlantic economy. Its ships reached the Caribbean, Africa, and Europe, carrying fish, timber, and rum. Wealth flowed in, and with it came pride and tension. The city prospered under British rule, yet began to chafe under its weight. Taxes, tariffs, and laws written across an ocean stirred resentment in the narrow streets of this growing town. The first sparks of rebellion came quietly. Coffeehouses buzzed with whispers of injustice. Pamphlets circulated calling for liberty. The voices were small at first, but their echo grew. The more England demanded, the more Boston resisted. And resistance, once born, is a fire that never sleeps. In March 1770, tension boiled over. British soldiers, stationed in the city to enforce unpopular taxes, clashed with angry citizens on King Street. Snowballs turned to stones, and stones to gunfire. When the smoke cleared, 5 colonists lay dead. The city froze in shock. It would be called the Boston Massacre, and though only a handful had fallen, their blood marked the beginning of something far greater. Among the witnesses that night was a silversmith named Paul Revere, who etched the scene into copper, a print that spread across the colonies like wildfire. The message was clear. Tyranny had drawn first blood. The tragedy united the people in defiance. 3 years later, the tension reached its breaking point. It was December 16, 1773, a bitter winter night. A crowd gathered at the Old South Meeting House, voices rising with fury against the British tax on tea. Outside, the harbor lay still, 3 ships waiting under moonlight, their holds filled with the taxed cargo. Then, from the crowd, a cry and a movement. Men disguised as Mohawk warriors rushed to the docks, boarded the ships, and hurled hundreds of chests of tea into the icy water. The harbor turned brown that night, and history turned red-hot. The world would remember it as the Boston Tea Party. To the British, it was rebellion. To the people of Boston, it was justice. Retaliation was swift. The coercive acts, known in the colonies as the Intolerable Acts, shut down Boston as harbor, stripped the colony of self-government, and sent redcoats marching through its streets. But instead of submission, the city's suffering became a rallying cry. The punishment of one town became the cause of an entire nation. In 1775, the first battles of the American Revolution erupted just beyond Boston's borders. Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill. The hills around the city thundered with musket fire. Smoke rose over Charlestown as British and colonial forces clashed for control. Though the Patriots lost the ground that day, they proved something vital, that common men could stand against an empire. Inside the city, fear mixed with resolve. Families hid in cellars as cannons echoed across the bay. Churches became hospitals, and taverns turned into planning rooms. From these narrow, winding streets, the Revolution found its pulse. Boston, once a Puritan refuge, had become the cradle of liberty. When George Washington arrived in 1776 to lead the Continental Army, he found a city under siege and a people unbroken. Using cannons dragged from Fort Ticonderoga, he surrounded the British on Dorchester Heights. Within days, the redcoats withdrew, leaving behind a city scarred, hungry, but free. The British fleet sailed away into the gray Atlantic, and Boston stood in silence. Its harbor, once filled with imperial ships, now reflected the first light of a new nation. In just one generation, Boston had transformed from a loyal colony into a symbol of rebellion. Its cobblestone streets, once walked by merchants and ministers, now echoed with the footsteps of revolutionaries. The city that began as a city upon a hill had become a beacon for the world, a place where ordinary people proved that freedom was not granted but earned. And though the war would rage on, Boston's role was written in the stone and smoke of history, the spark that lit the fire of independence, the voice that refused to be silenced, the heart of a revolution that would give birth to a nation. The revolution had ended, and the United States was young, restless, uncertain, and hungry to grow. In the heart of New England, Boston stood reborn from war. Its harbor once again filled with ships, its streets alive with merchants and laborers, dreamers and thinkers. The ideals of liberty had been won, but now came the harder task, to build a nation worthy of them. The 19th century brought a new energy, the pulse of industry. Smoke rose from chimneys, hammers rang against iron, and the clatter of progress echoed through the narrow streets. Boston became a workshop of the new America. Its shipyards launched vessels that conquered oceans. Its factories spun textiles, boots, and tools for a growing republic. The old Puritan town was transforming into a modern metropolis, forged not by sermons, but by steam. But industry demanded hands, thousands of them, and so they came. From Ireland, fleeing famine, from Italy, escaping poverty. From every corner of Europe, carrying little more than faith and hope. They poured through the docks of East Boston, their accents filling the air with a new rhythm. Many arrived broken, but they built with unbroken will. The Irish dug the city's canals, laid its railroads, and paved its streets. They lived in cramped quarters, worked long hours, and faced bitter prejudice. Yet, slowly, they claimed their place. The same people once scorned as outsiders became policemen, firemen, and politicians. From their struggle rose names like John F. Fitzgerald, paving the way for another famous Boston dynasty, the Kennedys. Boston was growing not just outward, but upward and outward into the sea itself. The narrow Shawmut Peninsula could no longer contain it. Through one of the most ambitious engineering feats of the century, entire neighborhoods were built on man-made land. The swamps and tidal flats of Back Bay and South End were filled in, transformed into elegant boulevards and brownstone rows. Where once there was water, now stood beauty, a city reclaiming its geography and redefining itself with every brick. The skyline changed, but so did the soul. As factories roared, reformers rose. Boston became the conscience of America, home to abolitionists, thinkers, and poets. In Beacon Hill, the words of Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, and Harriet Beecher Stowe thundered against slavery. Their pamphlets, speeches, and prayers became weapons in a moral war that would soon divide the nation again. The Boston Athenaeum, the Common, the meeting halls, all became battlegrounds of ideas. Yet, even as Boston fought for freedom beyond its borders, it wrestled with its own inequalities. Immigrants crowded into tenements. Disease spread through poor neighborhoods. The rich promenaded on Commonwealth Avenue while the working class toiled in South Boston's mills. Progress came at a price, and the gap between wealth and survival widened with every passing year. Still, innovation never slept here. Boston was a city of firsts. The first public library, the first subway in America, the first telephone exchange, and one of the earliest electric streetcar lines. In 1897, when the Boston subway opened, crowds descended into the tunnels with wonder and fear. It was more than transportation, it was transformation. The city had mastered the land, and now it conquered the earth beneath it. By the end of the 19th century, Boston was no longer the Puritan capital of old, nor the rebellious harbor of revolution. It was a city of contrasts, of scholars and stevedores, poets and politicians, Brahmins and bricklayers. It was the birthplace of universities and unions, cathedrals and factories, ideas and iron. Its harbor, once a symbol of protest, was now a gateway to the world. Its skyline, still low and modest compared to New York or Chicago, carried a quiet confidence, the dignity of a city that didn't need to shout to be heard. Boston had become something unique, a living bridge between past and progress, where faith had evolved into education, rebellion into reform, and work into legacy. The old city upon a hill now stood upon foundations of iron, labor, and resilience. And as the century closed beneath the gaslight glow of cobblestone streets, one truth remained unchanged. Boston's greatness was not built by the powerful alone, but by the countless hands that arrived with nothing and built everything. The 20th century began with optimism. Boston entered it as a proud, bustling city, industrial, intellectual, confident. Its harbor was busy, its factories alive, its schools and churches thriving. The world was changing fast, and Boston seemed ready for it. But beneath the surface, the tides of history were turning, and soon they would sweep through every street and neighborhood of the city. The first decades of the century brought both progress and pain. The great waves of immigration continued, filling the city's narrow streets with Italians, Poles, Jews, and Eastern Europeans, each adding new colors to the tapestry of Boston. Yet, as the population grew, so did the divide between rich and poor. The old Yankee elite, the so-called Boston Brahmins, looked down from Beacon Hill, while the newcomers fought for survival in cramped, aging tenements of the North End and South Boston. Factories roared, but their profits rarely reached the hands that fed them. The city's industrial glory began to fade as new manufacturing centers emerged farther west. Then came 1919, the year the streets literally ran with chaos. A storage tank burst in the North End, sending a wave of molasses surging through the neighborhood, killing dozens. It was absurd and tragic, a dark symbol of a city losing control of its own growth. As the decades advanced, Boston found itself trapped between its past and its future. The Great Depression hit hard. Mills closed, ships stopped sailing, and once bustling docks grew silent. Yet the city's soul endured in classrooms, churches, and libraries in the conviction that knowledge and faith could outlast despair. World War II revived the economy briefly as shipyards and factories roared back to life. But after victory came decline. The post-war boom favored suburbs, not cities. Families fled to the new neighborhoods of Quincy, Brookline, and Waltham, chasing lawns and quiet. Left behind were the aging buildings, the tired infrastructure, and the growing poverty of Boston's core. By the 1950s and 60s, the once glorious metropolis had become a patchwork of segregation and struggle. Political machines ruled neighborhoods like fiefdoms. Corruption and racial tensions simmered beneath the surface. Urban renewal promised salvation. Bulldozers tore through historic districts, erasing whole communities in the name of progress. The West End, a working-class neighborhood rich in culture and memory, was flattened to make way for modern towers. Thousands were displaced. The pain ran deep. At the same time, the fight for equality reached Boston's streets. The civil rights movement echoed through Roxbury and Dorchester, demanding justice. In the 1970s, the city became a battleground once again, not between colonists and empire, but between its own citizens. The busing crisis erupted as schools were ordered to desegregate. Buses carrying black students into white neighborhoods were met with protests, violence, and rage. The same city that once preached liberty now struggled to practice it. Boston's spirit, though wounded, never broke. Through the chaos, voices rose for change. Community leaders, teachers, and pastors rebuilt trust one block at a time. Universities like Harvard, MIT, and Boston University began to redefine the city's identity, not as a factory town, but as a hub of ideas. The skyline grew quieter but smarter. What it lost in steel, it gained in science. Hospitals, labs, and research centers filled the gaps left by shuttered factories. A new kind of revolution was taking shape, one not fought with muskets or protests, but with minds and microscopes. By the 1970s, Boston had learned how to adapt to its wounds. It was no longer the industrial giant of the 19th century, nor the rebellious capital of the 18th. It was something rarer, a survivor. The city carried its scars openly, in the empty lots where old neighborhoods once stood, in the faded murals, in the stories whispered over bar counters and church pews. But in those scars lay strength. By the dawn of the 1980s, cranes began to rise again over the Charles River. The glass towers of the John Hancock Center and Prudential Tower gleamed above the old brick streets, symbols of renewal, not arrogance. The lights of Fenway Park still glowed at dusk, and the echoes of its cheers reminded everyone that Boston's heart still beat strong. After a century of turmoil, decline, and reinvention, the city had earned its most valuable lesson. Greatness is not found in perfection, but in perseverance. Boston had fallen before, to fire, to poverty, to prejudice, but each time it found a way to rise. And as the century turned once more, a new era awaited, one that would transform the city of revolution and resilience into a capital of knowledge, innovation, and light. By the 1980s, Boston was a city standing at the crossroads of past and promise. The cobblestone streets still whispered the tales of patriots and poets, yet new sounds filled the air: the hum of computers, the clang of construction, the pulse of a city learning how to reinvent itself once again. After decades of struggle, decline, and doubt, Boston was rising, not through industry or rebellion this time, but through intellect, innovation, and imagination. The change began quietly. Universities that had long shaped the nation's thinkers became engines of a new kind of revolution. At Harvard and MIT, scientists and engineers were designing technologies that would reshape the world. From these classrooms and laboratories came the birth of biotech, the internet, and artificial intelligence. Around Kendall Square and the seaport, old factories became glass offices filled with startups. The same city that once forged steel now forged ideas. Downtown, cranes began to pierce the sky again. The Prudential Tower and John Hancock Center stood like modern monuments of resilience, and around them, new structures rose from the ashes of the past. The Big Dig, one of the largest infrastructure projects in American history, transformed the city's landscape, burying highways, reconnecting neighborhoods, and giving Boston back its waterfront. It was chaos turned into creation, a literal reimagining of the ground beneath the city's feet. Yet through it all, Boston never forgot its soul. The brownstones of Back Bay, the gas lamps of Beacon Hill, and the echoes of Fenway Park remained, living proof that the city's strength lay not in erasing history, but in building upon it. Old and new merged seamlessly, colonial facades beside gleaming towers, traditions standing shoulder to shoulder with progress. The city's economy evolved with it. No longer powered by factories, Boston became one of the intellectual capitals of the world, a hub for medicine, technology, and education. Its hospitals and research centers drew some of the brightest minds from every corner of the globe. Innovation became the new industry, knowledge, the new raw material. But progress, as always, came with its shadows. The rise of the innovation economy brought wealth and inequality. The cost of living soared. Neighborhoods once filled with working-class families now faced gentrification. The very success that saved the city also threatened to price out the people who had sustained it for generations. Boston, as it had always done, found itself wrestling with its own contradictions: progress versus preservation, prosperity versus fairness. Still, resilience remained Boston's defining feature. When tragedy struck, like the Boston Marathon bombing of 2013, the city stood together as one. The words "Boston Strong" became more than a slogan. They became a creed, echoing through the streets where colonists once cried for liberty. The same courage that defied empire now defied fear. Today, Boston stands as a testament to 4 centuries of evolution, a living story of survival and reinvention. It is both ancient and new, a colonial port turned global innovation hub, a city of revolution reborn as a city of ideas. Its skyline glitters with ambition. Yet beneath those towers lies the same granite spirit that built the first meeting houses and shipyards. From the winding alleys of the North End to the shining towers of the seaport, Boston is a bridge between centuries. Students from every nation walk the same streets where revolutionaries once marched. Scientists in white coats work just miles from where blacksmiths once forged muskets. The tools have changed, but the purpose remains the same: to shape the future. Every era has left its mark: the Puritan's faith, the patriot's courage, the immigrant's struggle, the innovator's dream. Together, they form the heartbeat of a city that refuses to stand still, because Boston is not just a place, it's an idea. An idea that every generation must rebuild its world. An idea that failure is never final. An idea that no matter how many times it falls, a city, like its people, can always rise again. This is Boston, the city of freedom, the city of learning, the city that built America and continues to build what comes next. 4 centuries have passed since a handful of settlers stepped onto the rocky shores of Shawmut. They came with faith and built a city. Others came with dreams and rebuilt it again and again. From wooden cottages to towers of glass, from cobblestone alleys to digital skylines, every generation left its mark. Boston has burned, fallen, and risen more times than history can count. It has been a city of faith, of rebellion, of labor, and of light. A city that fought kings, built nations, and taught the world that freedom is not given, it is earned. Its strength is not in its buildings nor its wealth, but in its people, the workers, thinkers, and dreamers who refuse to give up. From the cry of revolution to the hum of innovation, Boston has never stopped becoming. Because this city, like the nation it helped to create, is built on one eternal promise that even in darkness there is always light, and from every fall there will always rise again.